was working with, um, the folks that I interacted with on a daily basis, they
Yes.
really guided me and said, well, just go to this store. Have you heard about Jamaican black castor oil? It was these little things that they shared freely. And I felt like I was now becoming a part of the conversation. And little by little, the chemistry started coming back, because then I would make something and say, wait a second, let me write this down. Let me write this down. Let me write this down. So that's sort of the parallel of how my self-care journey with ee-bair Naturals started. And as I started doing this care for myself, I started feeling better. And at the same time, I think I was also trying to understand what else is there for me.
Welcome to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and I'm excited to have you join me as I interview community members and business leaders from the communities in which I live, work, and serve through my business Kooler Garage Doors. We're going to bring you highlights on characters in our communities. Why? Because community matters, and I want to know more about who is behind our business and leadership in order to understand and support the community fabric that our relationships make up. And collectively, we can build stronger communities that support our lifestyles, our youth, and our health. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn. Today, I am sitting with Grace Kinda, CEO and founder of ee-bair Naturals. And I'm really excited to get into your story, Grace. This is the first time we've met, and already I can sense a grounded presence from you, and I'm just excited to learn about your story. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really excited to be here. I'm ready to get started. I just really appreciate having a space.
I love it. I love it. And you are beaming in from Denver, Colorado, correct?
Yes, I am. Cloudy Denver.
Beautiful. Cloudy Denver. I love it. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Kenya, and I grew up in a little town called Meru. It's actually next to, you can see Mount Kenya, not too far from Meru. But the interesting thing is I grew up in Meru, but my parents came from the village. So in a sense that my growing up also was a part of going to the village back where my parents came from. My parents came from the village, they met in the city and moved to this little town. And so that experience of growing up, having moments when you travel far distances to see your relatives, being immersed in such different, when you're driving down the road in Kenya, it's one of the most beautiful places to drive. You'll see the zebras by the road. You'll see the pink flamingos by the road. You'll see vegetation and tea, and on your way to the village. So that was part of my growing up as well, because we're very tight knit as a community. And when about 6 years old, I moved from this beautiful little mountain town, quiet and sleepy, into the heart of Nairobi. So I am also a city girl in a sense, where I grew up just seeing the city in the background, the hustle and bustle of life, hearing the market sounds, just seeing, it was very cosmopolitan at the time. I also grew up in that, and I also have a little bit of that in me. So my growing up was, I think about it situationally, where I actually was born, but also thinking about all of those experiences of growing up for me, and nature and locations and just how diverse they were is just a big part of what I experienced very early on.
Wow. It sounds amazing. Kenya is a place I've not been to, and, my reference of it, I guess, would be movies or TV shows or books, magazines, right? And what you just described is pretty much a wide spectrum from mountain village to city and everything in between.
Yes, it's very interesting when I came to the US and I found people who lived in place. And that was very peculiar to me. So I came here on a scholarship for young women. And I came here when I was 18. And I think part of the reason I was so confident in coming here, as a young person, because I was so used to this experience of new experiences all the time. And so when I encountered people that had lived in Pennsylvania all their lives, I was like, where else have you been? So I was really curious. That's something, in hindsight, it's probably like a very, moving from Kenya to the US with, I think, a suitcase, a big Samsonite suitcase and a carry-on bag. And like, yeah, let's do it. It was really, it just kind of like stopped me in my tracks a little bit. But it was just, I think that, that spirit and just seeking out new experiences is just, I don't know how to explain it. It's sort of I don't know how you travel, but for me, travel is sort of like a rejuvenating space for me.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, this is Luke from Kooler Garage Doors. Just want to take a quick second to talk about our sponsor, Sommer Garage Door Openers. We believe Sommers are the best in the business when it comes to garage door openers. We always recommend them for residential installs because of the many features they have, such as Wi-Fi connectivity and safety features like a fixed chain that runs along a secure rail for a quiet and safe operation. Click the link to find out more about Sommer Garage Door Openers.
You came to the U.S., 18. You're in Denver now. Connect the dots. How did this play forward?
So I'll start actually with one. I have to recognize my mom. So my mother became a widow at a very young age, in her early 30s. Plus my dad and my older brother. And with widows in the African context, especially in Kenya, there's a lot of issues that surround the rights of widows because it's sort of a patriarchy, a space of patriarchy. So when a protector in the home dies, it's sort of life stops for the woman. And my mom had a lot of responsibilities afterwards. So I want to praise my mom because she's the one who went above and beyond to truly get me even to the doors of Villanova, where I eventually went to college. So she really advocated for me. She invested a lot of time and resources in helping pay for my SAT. I'd never experienced an SAT before that. But we taught very differently in Kenya. Sort of the British system and the American system is quite different. So she advocated for me, and I followed her. I followed her guidance. And we got connected to Zawadi Africa, which is an organization that supports young women who, and without that, we wouldn't necessarily have sought higher education because of resources. So it was just a combination of that. And 8 months between my SAT and, within 8 months, I still not yet turned 19. I turned 19 in America. I came here in August. I turned 19 in November. So I went to Villanova, and this is sort of where my story kind of begins, because I came in with a goal of studying medicine. And this proved to be a very difficult challenge because I didn't quite understand. Our systems are different. So not only did I had a challenge with culture, I also had a challenge with grasping concepts, but also was lost in a way. So I struggled quite a bit in the first year. And what came out of that, as I did my own work, was realizing that chemistry, the way I understood it, I also want to say that I'm a big chemistry nerd. I can truly say this because back then I left my biochemistry major to pursue sociology. And the reason why I did that is I felt the loneliness in my soul. There's something when you leave home very young and lack those social supports. I kind of forgot. I kind of lost that sense of belonging, even through my travels, I was now alone for the very first time. So somewhere along the line, I felt this sense of being lost. But I found myself, and I would go to these humanities. I was fascinated. So I had to make the decision to put my chemistry dream, on park because I said, I need to do something different. So I did sociology, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. I got to understand why language is important, because then I could be able to speak. I was really fascinated with psychology and sociology because they spoke language. They also spoke about people that I hadn't seen in society. So, for example, I got to learn about, in Kenya, you never learn about the African-American experience and the African-American story. And it became something that was so important to me because I thought, this is my new community. So in those ways, that part filled out my life. So I finished my degree, and I decided to go back and do a master's in counseling, specifically on clinical mental health. So I did that for 2 years. I worked in addictions treatment, and that was another experience because then you meet people. They're not just textbooks, they're people, and you're there to serve people. And at times it would be the most challenging thing I could ever get up and do is to do a 30-minute session. The most is 3 hours, trying to talk to folks that are struggling about recovery. And sometimes I struggled to believe it myself because I could see the tension. So it rounded me out more. I think about these experiences it helped me be conversant with myself, which is something I thought I lacked at the time. And that became a big tension for me mentally. And one of the things that was happening at the time was my journey with my beauty. Remember, I'm growing up here in the United States between 18 and 24. I'm trying to sort of build my own sense of self. What does beauty look like? What does feeling confident really look like? And back in 2010, 2008, around that area, there was no representation. I would walk into a CVS and there was truly nothing for me. And that made my mind messed up. It messed up my mind a bit. So it came at a point when I was working as a therapist where I was extremely stressed, and I suddenly started thinking about self-care. It just kind of popped in. I said, okay, what are my sisters doing? Because then I was able to have conversations with people and go and ask for help. Because I was so far away from my family, and I knew that it would be hard for them to understand. But I was able to talk to my sisters for the first time and understand how to ask for help. So my sisters guided me. I'm talking about the ladies that I was working with, the folks that I interacted with on a daily basis. Yes. They really guided me and said, well, just go to this store. Have you heard about Jamaican black castor oil? It was these little things that they shared freely. And I felt like I was now becoming a part of the conversation. And little by little, the chemistry started coming back, because then I would make something and say, wait a second, let me write this down. Let me write this down. So that's sort of the parallel of how my self-care journey with ee-bair Naturals started. And as I started doing this care for myself, I started feeling better. And at the same time, I think I was also trying to understand what else is there for me. I felt that I was working with people, but I truly wanted to be a part of the process upstream. I always think about a long time ago, the story about a river, and people keep falling in the river, and you're continuously trying to take them out of the river until you realize that maybe you need to go upstream and figure out why people keep falling in the first place. And it was that switch that truly made me understand that I need to step out of this role, and I need to step in a space where I can see what's happening and contribute to those conversations. So that my journey then took me into developing programs, helping be part of the process, doing events, and but one of the things I really loved about that stuff is it gave me a voice, and it allowed me to amplify people's voice through my work, the work of my hands. And I felt that was really cool. So I did criminal justice and re-entry work in Philadelphia. I loved that quite a bit. And then I got a job in 2019 here to work in Colorado, actually. And it was an accelerator program. So we would work with, we would work with grants. We would work with different forms of money that's dedicated towards impact, and work to identify organizations, nonprofits, or profits that are working to advance social impact work, and support them through resources, technical support, and assistance. So I did that here in Denver. It was such a great time. It was a culture shock because Denver is so different from Philadelphia, where I was. But I think that's a long story of how I got here. And I just have so many experiences. It's hard to quantify where to start.
It's amazing, Grace. And, every time I get in these conversations, I love to start in the back and build out this context, because now I'm seeing where there's small town rootedness in real deep culture, and then bouncing into the city, bouncing into a different country, different culture, and yet having this desire to make an impact, work with people, infiltrate chemistry and psychology and all the things. So here's a question for you.
Yes.
As you mentioned, the analogy of the river and people falling in the river and pulling them out, and then they slip in the river again, pull them out, and now you're going upstream. Would you say that there is a direct correlation with self-care and not falling in the river?
Well, there's something about falling in the river. I've come to appreciate the voice of lived experience. And I think lived experience is truly that. And maybe for some folks, I think about the stages of awareness. There's so many things that for me, if I really truly look back, I could really maybe track back to the pre-awareness stage, because things take time. Stories are like years and decades long. And maybe in some ways we might be privileged to not have been falling in the river. But I think many people who attempt self-care have fallen in the river and understand. So it's speaking as someone who, I know for some, when I enter communities or my excitement to work with people I recognize it doesn't necessarily mean that they relate to me in the sense that they have understood what it is to fall in the water. And maybe my advice isn't necessary, or it's not ready to be heard at that moment in time. And I accept that, but I've fallen in the river of thinking I know enough times. To truly understand, I think some of that, it's sort of hard to tell. Are the experiences, the experiences where you haven't fallen in the river at some point? We all have that experience.
Yeah. That's a great point. I just think of, I hear self-care, I hear self-love.
Yes.
And you mentioned, addiction and recovery. I spent some time in drug prevention, which is different and yet similar in the sense that it's a lot of skills, education, and awareness.
Okay.
And what I found in my studies was that there were no drug problems, there was life. And underlying any quote unquote problem, there could be trauma, there could be awareness, there could be a self-love component to the game. And so I love the perspective. I think, we do have to live through experience. And so we're going to touch the fire. We're going to jump in the water. We're going to slip and fall on the water and pull ourselves out, or have the assistance of community or other members help us out of there. And then we've got new awareness, new experience to set our feet on.
Yeah. I would also like to add that the sense of community, thinking about it in a 3D experience, that part of self-care for some might be having the persistent person who has not had that experience but can see, a different side of what's happening. Part of that is recognizing that it's an ebb and flow. Part of that is recognizing that there could be other people who might be involved in that conversation. I think self-care is sort of like knowing that you fell, or knowing that you being in that space of consciousness, I think. Like whether it's listening to your body or listening to your gut, I think that's the part that for me, when I experience when I feel, especially when I worked in therapy work, you can imagine sitting with 25 different people who bring in their life problems, and the only thing that might connect them is a desire to stay clean, but a desire does not necessarily translate into action. But when you look at the group and you look at yourself in it, I came to realize that what happens in here is a model of what happens outside, in the sense that you can just sense unspoken, you can just sense how people sit and how they relate to each other, and be able to talk about them and be able to bring it to the person in an individual and say, I noticed this. I'm not the expert, but I would love to. I noticed this. I see you. And you can tell me no, but I think there's nuances, and that's why I really came to appreciate just all the work that has found me so far, because it truly has boiled down to conversations. For me, problem solving, community building, it's just, what problem are we looking at? What are we looking to solve together? And that, for me, in the moment, that provides me self-care.
How would you define self-care?
Oh man, this is different. This is difficult. I think that self-care is a gradual process. There is no moment, like one moment of self-care. It's a continuous, I think of it sort of how a heart beats 72 beats per minute. I think self-care is something that needs to happen in its own time. It's sort of like a rhythm that needs to run. And I think it's a combination of things, because I've worked in mental health and I've experienced mental health. And I know the importance of rhythms, right? I would struggle with anxiety. So a rhythm of self-care would be counting, or certain mantras in my head, or I read books. I'm a big fan of science fiction, so I lose myself in these huge books. I print out quotes. I understand that about myself, and so I am in a continuous, I force myself to be in that continuous state. It may be listening to my body in terms of, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you lose something and you're looking for it, and a random place keeps popping up in your head to look, but you deliberately don't go there, and you go everywhere else but the thing. And then you're like, oh, the first place I thought of is where I could have checked. And that recognizing that, because those are, for me, it's a lot of mental work for me. That's self-care. When I can, I tell people freely, I will delude myself into self-care. I will tell myself whatever it needs for me to practice self-care, not self-serving self-care, but self-care when I'm actually listening to the parts of my body, because my brain is too busy doing whatever it needs to do. So for self-care, for me, is a rhythm. Self-care for me is accepting. Self-care for me is actually becoming aware. And that takes work, but it's a rhythm. Making your bed every day is self-care. It might sound a bit, it's very random, but when you listen, when you pay attention to where you sleep, where you eat, where you lay your head, the basic humanity needs, when you can truly step outside of yourself and listen to your base needs, I think that you're practicing self-care. I really do.
I love it. I kind of figured there would be a deeper answer from you on that question. And
you can probe me. Please feel free to ask it.
No, the delivery was great because there's so much depth in there. And I guess, for the listener and, to summarize what I think I just heard was, self-care is around presence. And you just use the words of step outside of yourself, which to me is stepping outside of our ego and potentially going deeper into our body and soul and having this connection, right? Yeah. And just in our conversation, Grace, it seems like this connection goes deep into the roots of family, of community, and of story, of meaning making. And we pull this together so that we don't get caught up in the mental ego game. We gain this presence that can ultimately allow ourselves to realize that we are beauty in every moment. And by honoring that, we have self-care, whether that's cleaning with good products or reading or stepping out of the busy race, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of...
I think that, I think the reason why, for me, that self-care is still sort of an iceberg for me. The more I think I know about myself, the more I sort of understand the way I am. And that takes a lot of courage, because I think for me, I've experienced when I lost my dad and my brother when I was very young, like I was 8, I still experience that feeling. And it's hard to truly, 26 years later, right? And that's pain. And when you live with pain, you become very aware of the place that pain can have on you. So it can be a momentary moment of pain, a huge point of pain, or multiple points of pain. And people experience that physically, mentally, in the spaces they're in their homes, in their families. For me, what I had when I was in Kenya, I lost almost half my family. So I think for me was trying to understand what family then means, what support truly means, what confidence truly means, because I sort of retreated into my shell. And the more I experience the world, and I think chemistry, when I talk about these points in my life or these experiences, they're really a series of coming out experiences, awareness experiences, me becoming aware to the pain in my existence, the things that made me uncomfortable. And so self-care was learning to listen to myself. When something didn't feel good, you listen to yourself. And it just started simple like that. I think that when you experience pain, and in a society where you have to cope, a lot of it comes involved with a lot of loneliness and a lot of feelings of exclusion. But for me, I would speak for myself, learning to speak the language of pain, I think that then I could understand why I struggled when I first came to America. It helped me understand the struggle of being raised up without a father and a widow in a family that didn't have a lot of resources. It helped me understand the reason why I felt like I'd failed myself when I switched from chemistry to sociology, because that's like, in Kenya, everyone is supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and technician, and I'm here, I'm going to do this thing. So I had to. I think it was something that, a drive that I didn't know what it meant. But one thing about me is I will reflect. I think it for me, maybe perhaps what you see as grounding is I hold a lot of reflection, and I've also done a lot of things just the same way I've traveled. I really see, like, I love Denver because people have no choice but to contend with nature. It's there.
Yeah.
Deal with it. And nature is there, and people will have their relationship with it, traumatic and otherwise. But it's a thing. And pain and self-care work together. And there's no bigger or greater pain. It's just how you love yourself through that pain. I think there's a part where you can bring choice into these spaces. I think that's where self-care is most powerful, because you have your own agency and you take that in. And, it's a journey of owning that space and feeling, I truly have a say in my own life, not anyone else's, just my own. And that's enough.
Yeah. It's a great message. Tell us about ee-bair Naturals. How's it different? How do we find you? How do we get in touch?
Yeah. So ee-bair Naturals is a Denver-based company. I am homemaking all of these products by hand. I incorporate natural African remedies. I use a lot of herbs and oils, and incorporate a lot of ancient knowledge that's been used, whether that is fermentation, letting it sit in the beautiful Denver sunlight for a few hours. I put a lot of love and care into the products that I make. And my goal is to replace everything in your bathroom, in your bedroom, with quality ingredients and make you feel good, and also protect your skin, and also help you connect with nature. I'm online. Yes. I have a website, www.ee-bairnaturals.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, pretty much Etsy as well, under the same name, ee-bair Naturals.
Love it. Yeah. And just for the listeners who are not watching the video, it's ee-bair, Iber, naturals.com. We'll have these links in our show notes and tie you into Grace's social as well. I encourage you to reach out, check out the website. It's actually absolutely beautiful. It's really well done, Grace. And I just appreciate your grounded presence this morning.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was a pleasure. And ee-bair means you are beautiful, so deal with it.
So deal with it. I love that. Love that. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Grace.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. We count on your subscriptions, your likes, your shares, and I encourage you to do that now. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, lower right-hand button. If you're on audio, download this, share it, and we look forward to having you on the next one.